Well, hello again. The title of this testimony is Fighting the Fight Part 3. Part 1 was about me getting the job here in Dallas in spite of a number of people who the enemy used against me. Number 2 was about my dad's salvation. And this one is about my mom. My mom and I didn't talk very often, not as often as probably you would expect. But we were, cordial and everything. And she thought I'd gone off the deep end spiritually, or religiously, I guess. But she was a pretty famous lady in Ohio. She one year was named Ohio Woman of the Year for her work in battered women's shelters long before it was unpopular to have battered women. So she was kind of a trailblazer in that area, worked for the George Gunn Foundation. But now she's retired, playing solitaire all day, every day at home. But we had, pretty good talks on the phone. When we talked, we just didn't really talk very often. 4 or 5 times a year, maybe. One day, Becky, my wife, decided she needed to, or it felt like she needed to call my mom, which was a real stretch for her because my mom and I dragged her through a number of relationships, and she was too tired for any more. And so they didn't know each other very well. But Becky had a heart for my mom, and we just give her a call. And she said, "Hi, Jen." My mother's name was Jen, and "How you doing?" And my mom said, "Oh, I'm doing good." And then she hesitated and said, "Well, actually, I guess I'm not doing that good. I've had this pain in my shoulder since October. In November, they said it was probably bursitis. In December, they said it's probably just arthritis. Nothing seemed to help. Pain kept getting worse. So in January, I had an MRI, and today they called me and said it was cancer. And unfortunately, it is metastasized, and it's not just in my shoulder. And they said that I probably had maybe 6 months. If I took chemo, I might be able to stretch it out to a year. Well, boom. And it happened to be the very day that she found out that Becky felt the urge to call her. And so we talked, and her plans were to go into a hospital in Cleveland, Ohio, where she lived, a hospice hospital, or the hospice wing of a hospital, and live her last days there. She was packing things up, ready to sell her condo, and she was off. After much begging and pleading, she agreed to come stay with us. And she really didn't want to, because she didn't want to be a burden. And we finally convinced her that it didn't matter. We wanted her with us. And so we went to Ohio, and we picked her up and set her up in the back of a in a van, a regular van, and it actually took about 4 days for her to be, for us to get from there to here. It's a 2-day trip at most, but we took 4 days because she just wasn't comfortable for long periods of time. But we ate well. She actually, other than a little bit of pain from time to time, did very well. And by now we've got some pain fighting drugs, and so even when pain came, it didn't last long. And she was pretty mobile, and just not for very long periods of time. So we finally got to the house. Hospice was had already been there and set everything up with all the equipment we needed: hospital bed, potty chair, wheelchair, and she stayed with us. We brought her and some of her stuff and her parakeets. And this parakeet really loved being here. It was February, but it was warm enough to where the doors were open, and the parakeet constantly carried on conversations with the birds outside. We weren't used to that, so it was an extra aggravation, I guess you'd say. But really, everything went really well. My mom was fairly mobile. We kept her fed, kept her comfortable, and really didn't have a lot of problems at first. Hospice was involved, obviously, here. Had all the meds you could possibly ask for in terms of taking care of pain. But didn't have to use a lot of them. I mean, she was still doing pretty good. A couple weeks into it, we had some friends over here now and again, and they would stay for hours and talk to my mom, because she was a pretty interesting person to talk to. Hospice provided a chaplain. He came to visit with her. I forgot to mention, my mom was not saved at all. We didn't go to church when I was a kid. It just wasn't on the agenda, and there was a lot of self-reliance. Some of it's a curse on me. But she just never had a lot of utilitarian use for religion. And religion in the North was a little bit different anyway, for the most part, on average. Not as many people went to church, and the churches weren't exactly having revival most of the time. But in any case, she was unsaved. And so certainly one of the goals is to push that along if we could, and do whatever we needed to do. So the chaplain would come by, and he asked her, he said, Jen, what have you thought about what's next? And she said, yeah, I have. And he said, well, would you like to talk about it? And she said, yeah, maybe, why don't we get together maybe a month from now and go through it. Well, this seems to be moving kind of faster than the 6-month prognosis that we were given. And a month from now seemed like eternity. But she didn't have any sense of urgency about it. And so that's the way it was. Well, we're at about the 4-week mark, and Actually, I think the 5-week mark since diagnosis. And a longtime friend of Becky's, came to visit. They talked, Becky and Jen, and her name was Ruth, a friend, for 4 or 5 hours. And when her friend got up to leave, she had been saved not too long before that. But she told my mom, Jen, I'll be praying for you. And my mother said, well, okay, I guess that's all right. And my friend went out the door. Becky turned around, and my mother was right behind her, in her face. Completely surprised her. And frankly, she wasn't moving that fast, and so it surprised her in one sense that she had gotten there as fast as she got there. But she started fighting Becky and screaming and carrying on. And I was, I think, at a client on the way home, actually, from the client, and Becky called me and said, Greg, your mom's going crazy. And I said, well, I'm about 15 minutes away. She said, well, you got to get here. This is nuts. And I said, well, I'll get there as fast as I can. So I hung up and I called my neighbor across the street, who we knew pretty well, and was a good Christian guy, and said, hey, could you run over to my house and see if Becky needs any help? And he said, oh, sure, okay. So I got home 15 minutes later, and my neighbor, who's 6'3", probably 275, is standing in my living room, looking like he's keeping guard. And my mother is sitting on the floor not too far from him, kind of mumbling to herself. I look around the house, and it looked like it was ransacked. I mean, I don't think there were any pictures left on the walls. Stuff just all over the place. And Becky's sitting in a recliner, chain smoking, whenever she can get her hands to stop shaking enough to get a cigarette up to her mouth. And I'm in total disbelief. What is going on here? And my neighbor says to me, you got some real demonic stuff going on here, buddy. I thought, well, maybe. It's hard for me to believe that my sophisticated woman of the year mother is possessed, but I also see a house that's been ransacked, and my wife who's almost off the deep end. So my mother, we managed to get my mother into a wheelchair, and she sat there pretty silent for like 5 hours, and then finally said, I'm ready for bed. It's okay. So we put her in bed, and from that point on, she pretty much stayed there. And so on a Sunday night, we decide, which is, I don't know, a few days after this, we decide to help my mother get positioned on the porta potty. And it's just a matter of getting her out of bed, turning 90 degrees and sitting her down. And so we get her out of bed, stand her up, and are in the process of sitting her down. And all of a sudden, she just grabs our hands. Becky had one hand, I had the other. And all of a sudden, her hands are like vices. I mean, they're hurting me, and they're about to break Becky's hand. And so she's about halfway down on the porta potty, but now she's stiff as a board, and really can't let her go the rest of the way because the seat's sticking up, and it's a pretty sharp edge on it. And at the same time, she's not very cooperative, so I'm trying to get Becky's hand out of my mother's hand so we get free of that. And my mother starts trying to bite us. She's taking my hands that are on her wrist and trying to get them up to her mouth and bite my hand. And she's shouting, "No, no, no," all the while, and fighting me now as hard as she can. And with strength that it was not her strength. I mean, it was the way it exceeded her normal strength. I began to pray, and I look into her eyes, and I can see that it's not her. And I begin to basically do spiritual warfare against whatever is in her. And that took place for about 15 minutes. And I felt like, I mean, it subsided, but I felt like it really didn't go away. It just went back inside, so to speak, to fight another day. So we finished putting her on the porta potty and then getting her back into bed. Everything was okay. On Monday, I called my pastor, I think my associate pastor. I called a man over at Straight Street Ministries, a friend of mine. Called another friend of mine that we used to go to church with, that I knew, all of which I knew, were spiritually sensitive, and asked them if they'd come at noon to pray for my mom. And my assumption was, with that many spiritual people in the room, that this thing would rear its head and we could all deal with it. I didn't tell them what possibly might happen or what had happened, so I really kind of led them into a little ambush. But they came and we prayed, and nothing. I mean, I prayed for my mom and they prayed for me. Of course, that was great, but no manifestation of whatever was in my mom. And if you've seen Fighting the Fight Part 2, where my dad got saved, there was a point in that story that God told me everything was going to be okay. He was going to take care of it. And I had perfect peace about it. I got to see it and be a part of it. But this was a little different. I mean, my mom was pretty much incoherent and comatose. And I don't think reading the Roman Road was going to actually take any root or do any good. So I had the same feeling with my mom that God was saying it'll be okay. But I didn't see how somebody talking to her was going to do anything. And on Tuesday night, I'm on the phone with Paul Ward, our associate pastor, and I was telling him, I said, I have the same feeling I have for my dad, that it's going to be okay, but I can't imagine how, unless she's going to have some sort of lucid period. And anyway, I hung up the phone, and my daughter's in the kitchen. She said, "Where's the bird?" And the bird was in the living room where the phone was, and I looked over at the cage, and I don't see any bird. I don't know. This is strange. And so I walked over to the cage, and the bird was laid out in the bottom of the cage. Dead as a board. And first thought I had was about the demons going into the pigs and the pigs going into the sea. And I felt like, wow, maybe that's it. And so Wednesday morning, the next morning, I got up, going to work, and my mother was looking out the window of her bed, and she was mumbling. And I came up to the side of the bed, and she acknowledged, or she turned her head, saw me, and at that point, Becky came in the room, and by this time, her and Becky had built quite a relationship. They've spent quite a bit of time together, and my mother really warmed up to Becky. And Becky walked in, and my mother said, "Oh, there's my Becky. I love you. I love you. I love you. I love you." She turned to me and she said, "I love you. I love you. I love you." Turned back to Becky. "I love you. I love you. I love you. I love you." And then she said, "I'll be gone soon." Just about in that tone of voice. And it was just surreal. Number one, that was more "I love yous" than I've heard in my entire life from my mother. I mean, she wasn't bad, but she just didn't say that hardly at all. And literally, that was more than the rest of my life. I think I was 50-something at that point. And so, wow, she has been infusing love. Can't say it earnestly enough. And that's all she's saying, except one other thing. "I'll be gone soon." And it's like she was saying, God and I have worked this out, and I'll be gone soon, and everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be great. And then she turned back towards the window and continued to mumble and really kind of not acknowledge us being there anymore. And so I left, and we pretty much tended to her needs for the next couple of days. At this point, that was the last thing she spoke, really. After that, she just kind of went to sleep and stayed asleep. On Friday afternoon, she passed away. But when I got saved, I didn't know what saved meant. What I did know was I had a tremendous amount of love in my heart that I didn't have before I got saved. And her I love yous and her lack of concern for what's next told me that somehow she and God worked this out. No one else had to really be there. No one else was there. There's no Roman road. There was no pastor, no chaplain, just her and God. But they worked it out. So, I can look forward to seeing her once again. Well, that's two things I want to leave you with. Is number one, God loves you more than you can possibly know on this side of heaven. He is looking out for you, and he is sparing you from things that you don't even see, that you don't even know of. I'm convinced when I get there that I'll be able to see a movie of my life and see all of the things that I didn't even know were out there after me, that he protected me from. He's doing that for you. He loves you. And he has more, much more for you. We spend some time to acknowledge him and praise him and seek him. We can experience great power and wisdom, understanding. So it's there. It's there for the asking. God bless.